Hi, I'm Anna Runkle, also known as the Crappy Childhood Fairy. And today I have the honor of speaking with Mary Giuliani, who is an expert in how a history of trauma in childhood can affect us later in terms of our weight. And this is such a big issue for us. Mary, I'm really glad to have you here on the call with me.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here.
So tell me, what is your background and how did you get interested in the connection between obesity and childhood trauma?
Well, I've been a life coach for over 25 years and also have my own history of struggles with weight since I was like 5 years old. And so I've been on this personal growth path for 30 years and recently discovered that there was a brain, body, and mind impact from childhood trauma that I wasn't aware of. I understood the mind and the psychological aspect, but really tying in how our brain and nervous system can really drive anxiety, which drives eating, has been a big major breakthrough. And that's why I want to bring this work forward.
Now I know I've had earlier conversations with you, and when you talk about food being really helpful actually for the symptoms of PTSD, can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, many people are familiar with this, but some people aren't. The Adverse Childhood Experiences Study by Dr. Vincent Folletti and Robert Anda through the CDC and Kaiser Permanente. And Dr. Folletti was actually running an obesity clinic when he discovered that many of his patients were dropping out after losing all this weight. And he was really perplexed because why would people drop out when they were doing so well? And what he realized after interviewing many of them, he had thousands of people running through this clinic. So he had a great data set of people to ask questions from. He found out that really the food was really looked at as a solution versus the problem. In other words, the food was being used as what he called a psychoactive substance, just like a drug, for a sedative, for pain relief, and for an antidepressant to make you feel better. So, yeah.
That explains so much.
Yeah. Yeah, because we don't look at normally food as a drug, but if you really get mindful and when you eat stuff, you'll notice that your energy shifts and it changes.
And yet it's not really a sustainable drug. It just comes with certain problems.
Yeah, just like most drugs, there's a short-term boost in your mood, or maybe it numbs your pain, but in the long term, it has life-damaging consequences if you're not really learning how to deal with whatever your emotional pain or depression or anxiety is. And so that's why we end up with obesity, because it can never really solve the problem. It's just like a temporary fix.
Now, you learned about this through personal experience.
Correct. Yes. So when I was just 5 years old, I really sensed a lot of tension between my parents, and they didn't have really any emotional resolution, resolving conflict skills. And so there was just this chronic tension. And my dad, his side of the family used food to cope with stress. And so he used to eat when he'd get stressed out. So as a child, when I sensed that anxiety and I wasn't sure how to calm myself down, of course, I did what was modeled and I started eating too, not knowing that I was really medicating my anxiety and my sadness about how much pain there was in my family. So then I started gaining weight and getting bullied, and then all the shame and sadness and struggle around feeling judged for my body and not really, and really feeling like it was my fault. Like I should have had the more willpower or the ability to handle saying no to food, when again, I didn't know that there was things going on in my brain that were changing because of my environment. So it's been a huge breakthrough for me.
And you lost a significant amount of weight.
Yes, I actually got up to my top weight of 310 pounds when I was 42 and was able to lose 160 pounds and more importantly, keep it off. And the reason why I've been able to maintain my weight loss is I have been really focused on healing my relationship with myself, with other people, so that I don't have to turn to food. I'm not saying that I never do. I still use food to medicate every now and then. I think everybody does, but it's like 95% less. But the key piece for me, and the reason why I'm doing the work I'm doing, is to help people understand that the brain changes when it's exposed to toxic stress in childhood. And it drives that anxiety that makes you really need to medicate it. And it's not our fault that this happened. And that was a huge piece of shame to let go of, that it was never my fault that I had this eating problem. Of course, it's my responsibility to heal, but I think that's a big piece in and of itself, is understanding that, you know, we didn't cause this, and yet we can find ways to heal it.
That anxiety you talk about, I think for those of us with childhood PTSD, it's so familiar. But you know, what's it like for you?
Well, gosh, for me, it would show up in just feeling tense and feeling like, as a child, it was worrying about my homework, or worrying about getting bullied at school, or worrying about being liked and making friends. So this sort of ruminating, sort of fearful sense of life, and it's a horrible way to have to live, you know. And
Yeah,
so food was very, very calming for me.
calming. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah,
This is totally,
soothing.
yeah, it's something I relate to too. And the more I've been able to recover from the childhood PTSD, the less I weigh.
Right, exactly.
It's just going so much better, but it's a little up and down, and it has made me a lot more aware of that intense feeling. And some people have heard me say, it's funny because I'm wearing a headset right now,
Yes.
but I often say, like, when I'm in the middle of the PTSD, it's like wearing headphones, except like ACDC is blasting in my ears,
Yes.
and I'm trying to act normal like that's not happening.
Yes,
That's what it's
exactly.
like. And for me, like, overeating on carbs or fat, sugary things, that's kind of like what does it for me. I can sort of just like come back to earth a little bit.
Yes,
But then
absolutely.
it's like this sleepy feeling bad about myself. And I actually find that, like, when I eat better, my
Hmm.
head's clearer. I'm getting less overreactive. The PTSD doesn't flare up as much. So it's a vicious circle, you know, to like
Right,
eating to treat it doesn't really work in the long run.
right. And that's the big issue, is that we don't know that we have that, especially as children, or even as adults. Most of us don't really, it's not like you wake up and think, oh, you know, I had this really stressful childhood and my brain got changed and that's why I'm anxious. It's the only brain you've ever lived in. It's just normal to you, and it's normal to reach for food, and you don't really connect it with it being medication. In a sense, you just like, oh, I feel like having a cookie, or I feel like having this. But once you get really mindful about it and understand what types of foods are going to impact you and how they're going to impact you, then you can make different choices. But getting to the core issue is really the key piece of calming down your brain.
So calming down your brain. Can you just explain a little bit about how you guide people to the point where they can calm themselves?
Well, I think just having like what I call a cohesive narrative, a story that makes sense as to, you know, why have I been using food for all these years to begin with? We're using food for good reason. It's a solution. It's not an effective solution, but for me, it really saved me my sanity as a child. I mean, who knows? I could have. I mean, if you know, if you get a certain level of stress, you can become schizophrenic or have all kinds of other mental health issues. So in a way, it calmed me down enough to where I could cope. But then it had all the side effects of obesity and all of those things. So the first step is just understanding where it comes from, which can relieve a huge amount of shame. And then it's about really learning how to drop into how you're really feeling in your body, and recognizing when you are stressed, and understanding that there are things that you can do to calm yourself down without using food. There's a lot of somatic, which are really getting in touch with how you feel in your body, feeling more grounded, having, well, relationships. Having safe relationships are extremely calming, and a lot of people don't even realize that. But the issue for many of us with PTSD from childhood is that sometimes relationships can cause stress triggers. So we have to learn how to sort of titrate into feeling safe into that, and that's what I teach too.
The old people problem. It's
Yeah.
hard. It's hard, and just like having people close to you, it is stressful sometimes, and it can be triggering sometimes. And
Right.
but also not having people is incredibly stressful.
Exactly.
So it's like, if we don't learn to start handling this better, we're between a rock and a hard place.
And that's where just getting into really understanding what you're feeling, what your needs are, uncovering. Like for me, I was shamed a lot for having needs, and I was taught that if I didn't put everyone else's needs first, that I was a bad, selfish daughter. And so when you are trained in that sort of mindset, you're a human being, you have needs. So you're going to be stressed out because you're not getting your needs met. So the big first step is just really uncovering a lot of the false premises that you were raised to believe about who you are and how you're supposed to operate in the world. And it's really learning the art of extreme self-care is a huge piece of it. And knowing that it's okay to say no and not feel guilty. It's okay to put yourself first so that you can start really getting your needs met.
Yeah.
And so you don't need to medicate with food, basically.
Something you taught me about that I've been thinking a lot about ever since you said it was that food is a weird way that you can actually like set a boundary.
Oh, absolutely. That was the other really key piece of data that Dr. Filiti from the ACEs study found. So not only did he find that people that have severe obesity use food as a solution, as as a way to calm themselves down, and but also their body as a solution. So having a heavy body, he found, has 3 protective factors. One, for anyone that's had sexual abuse, it's like your body saying no for you. So if with childhood PTSD, if you've had sexual abuse, a lot of times the ability to say no is compromised because you have such a stress response that you can't really even speak.
Yeah.
And so having a body say no for you can be extremely protective. And that's what in fact, he found 55% of his patients had sexual abuse histories. And so, in fact, one of the famous sayings from one of his patients was, overweight is overlooked, and that's what I need to be, Yeah.
Yeah, like in a household where there's that threat going on all
Yeah.
the time, you want to be overlooked.
Yes, and the other piece a large body is protective for is for people that were beaten up and physically abused either by family members or on the schoolyard. Because
you want to be bigger.
Yeah, it's like if I'm bigger, people won't mess with me.
Yeah, big.
And the third protective factor of having a large body, and this is the one I could relate to the most, is that our culture doesn't have as many expectations for overweight people. So unfortunately, right?
Yeah.
So the point is that it's a way to play safe. In other words, if I'm really big and I'm really heavy, people are going to pressure me to go for it in my life. And plus, I'm not going to pressure myself because I'm going to be so spun out in my weight drama that it's all about that versus
I'll do an accomplishment after I lose.
Yeah. So it's a very unconscious way of playing it safe.
I think that is one of the most like not yet talked about aspects of childhood PTSD.
Yeah.
Is that playing it safe? It's not safe. It's just like everything else. It's not like cigarettes or overeating. It doesn't actually solve anything in the long run.
Right.
But it gives you a little buffer when things are just too much. It's an
emotional soothing mechanism for people like us that have had a lot of trauma and when you have a high anxiety, you're trying to soothe.
Yeah.
So if a body does it, or if the food does it, or and again, this is just the behavior of choice, right? Many people choose other things, work or drugs or alcohol or people pleasing, but yeah.
But sometimes that drug, this is the one, I just don't think it's talked about enough. And I became aware of it. I was listening to Mel Robbins' book, Kick-Ass, with my teenage son, actually.
Uh-huh.
It's great. It's like she interviews people and she sort of calls them out on what's holding them back. And one person, she calls her out and just says, well, you like to quit. She quits everything.
Yeah.
The person in the book she smoked a lot and she never wasn't quitting smoking, but like continuing to smoke is a way to just like it's a way to quit. It's a way to quit something else that you were working on.
Right.
Staying overweight is that. And I totally get it. Like I just have total compassion. I have been a heavy smoker. I have been an overweight overeater. And sometimes I've needed to quit for my own sanity and survival.
Yeah.
But that's the thing with the tools that you're teaching, stuff we're doing on Crappy Childhood Fairy, we're getting calm, we're getting re-regulated.
Right.
So that we can take on the next step.
Exactly. And I think a big piece I want to make sure people really get, this is really a self-compassion, self-forgiveness, self-acceptance process. Our culture is so perfectionistic and so into images and so into accomplishment and acquisition. And the message I want to get out there is this all begins with really just knowing we really did the best we could. And, and just really having that sense of compassion, um, and knowing that we can take our time in learning new methods, like asking somebody that's used food their whole life to cope, to like stop using food is like saying like, okay, so take away my oxygen, you know? So I'm very, very clear that we need a slow, safe process to find other ways to cope versus using food. And that's the other piece. That's the other reason why diets and stuff like that don't work, is you can't pull somebody's main coping mechanism without helping them find something healthier. And so, yeah.
And that's what you do, is you help people with that process of
Absolutely.
gradual change. So can you tell us about your course? Like, where can people find it?
Yes, I'm so excited. I'm launching my permanent weight loss solution course. It's and the subtitle of it is Guiding Women to Reach and Maintain a Healthy Weight for Life. It's launches on Zoom. It's a women's group 8-week course, and it launches on July 17th at 7 o'clock Pacific time. And my website is marygiuliani.net, GIULIANI.net, and all the information is there. So it's really going to be focusing on looking at the emotional drivers of eating, but also looking at practical ways to have what I call a self-loving food plan, and how to set boundaries with people, how to ask for what you need. Because all of these things, if they're not handled, is what drive the food issue, the weight issue, and then we get, all caught up in that, and it really sucks the life out of us when we could be really going for our dreams.
I have a feeling we're going to talk many times, Mary, because as you know, I'm really zeroed in on how our connections with people and our relationships, romantic and otherwise,
yes,
are so tied into the childhood PTSD. And the more I talk to you, the more I just realize, like, the food, the safety, the connections, the boundaries, it's all tied up. And
yeah, but we can unravel it, and that's the beauty of it. We know that's it.
Yeah, it's such an exciting time. Things like
the
ACE study have really, like, just propelled this burst of knowledge and wisdom, and people like you and me who can take our experience and recover and share it with others, and start, it's going to be like hundreds of thousands and millions of people are going to start improving now. And I think of all that human potential just trapped under the problems that used to be unsolvable.
Absolutely.
We didn't know. We thought, like, I don't know, let's talk about it. Let's medicate it. But that was not enough. It wasn't.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't until I really learned, like I said, I've been on my personal growth path for 30 years and been doing all this psychological work. And when I read the key book I would highly recommend everybody to read is The Body Keeps the Score, Brain, Mind, and Body and the Healing of Trauma by Bessel van der Kolk, MD. And that book, I read that about a year ago, blew my mind. I had more epiphanies than probably in any other book, because it finally gave me an understanding that it was my brain, which is command central, that had been changed as a result of that stress that drove the need to medicate with food, and that talk therapy alone can't heal a traumatized or dysregulated brain. You need specific treatments, and that's another thing that I go over in my course, as well as just but the understanding itself is just a huge breakthrough. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
You're so welcome.
This is so interesting, and I'm going to be actually trying to eat more mindfully starting right now.
Yay!
Thank you, Mary. And
you're welcome.
Continued.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you so much,
Talk to you
Anna.
again. Bye.
Bye, everybody.